Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show, and today we're going to have an absolute incredible guest. I'm excited. I got to listen to him, meet him in person, and experience part of his story in Las Vegas a few months ago. We've been not necessarily in the same circles, but I know a lot of people in his coaching group, so I know of him. I've heard a lot about him. I've seen him coming up the ranks of prominence in the world, not in any specific type of the world, just in the world. And I'm really grateful for your time, Jimmy, for coming on here. But we're also going to do something a little different on the podcast. So if you've been listening for a long time, I want you to just shift your mindset a little bit. So in the past, we've talked about how you want to be remembered and really focused on that aspect of somebody's legacy and what drove them to where they are. But we're going to hone that conversation in even more detailed. And we're going to be talking about from now on, what are the questions that people ask themselves that basically are the stimulus for why they do what they do and who they believe they can become in their life. And so that's going to be the new focus of the podcast. I'm doing this so that you guys, as you're listening to this, can be considering, hey, how would I answer that question? Become introspective and start making an actual transformation when you get your own answer to that. Your answer may not be the same as Jimmy's answer to the same question, and that's okay. But I think that the question is universally going to guide us to a place of servitude and love-based interactions. And that's why, why I'm changing the podcast to be that way. But also, I know Jimmy's question that was asked, at least one of them in his life, I'm sure he has a lot more than what I know of, was really transformational. So that's why I wanted him to kick off this new focus on the podcast, because I know he has a lot of value to add. So Jimmy is a phenomenal business owner, coach, mentor, leader in real estate space, leader in a lot of different areas, has a movement called We Are the They, which we're going to get into, and also just starting another movement. I don't know if it's Next Gen Kids or just Next Gen
We Are the They. How's that?
Next Gen We Are the They. Anyways, and also incredible purpose. And we have a lot of the same goals as far as like how we want to impact the world, although we go about it different because we have different experiences. And that's kind of what this podcast is going to be about. So I'm so excited. Thank you, Jimmy, for making the time to come on. I know you're busy and sharing with our audience these key questions. So I'm going to give it to you. Just go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your backstory and maybe start introducing some of those questions that have helped you become who you are today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Sam. Yeah, man, I at a very young age was very entrepreneurial. I mean, even when I was a kid, I would like find stuff that was on discount or sell at the grocery store, buy a bunch of it in bulk and go sell it door to door, doing things like that. I just always trying to make money. I remember when I was really little, I would sit at the bottom of the stairs and I'd hear my parents fighting over money a lot. And so I remember as a very little kid kind of associating like, if I have money, then we won't have problems in my house. And so I always kind of had this thought or whatever, just drive and motivation that, I want to have money very quickly and not have to struggle like that as a family. And so when I was 21 years old, I answered an ad in the paper to sell steak and chicken door to door. And I knew I could sell. I'd been a missionary for my church for 2 years, going door to door all day, every day. And so like I knew how to talk to people. And my very first day out on the doors, I was selling steak and chicken door. I was one of those guys that had a big freezer in the back of your truck and made a couple $100, like $300 in less than an hour, basically. And at that point, it was really cool because I kind of realized that my worst case scenario in life is I was going to be able to make 6 figures selling door to door. And it kind of blew the doors open of the possibilities for my life. And so I ended up doing that for about a couple of years. But in the meantime, I was experimenting with other things. I started a TV show. I started a business doing people's Christmas lights. I was just kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I ended up kind of realizing that real estate was going to be the path that I wanted to go, be a real estate agent. And so I got in as an agent. And long story short, I hired the top coach in the country. My first 6 months as an agent, I sold like 3 homes. I didn't know what I was doing. And then once I hired that coach, my next 6 months, I ended the year with over 60 sales. And year 2, with me and one assistant, had 98 sales. I was one of the 2 finalists for salesperson of the year on my board of realtors. And it just kind of took off. And so for the next basically 17 years, I was doing real estate and became one of the top agents in the country. Me and my team, with my partner, Tyler, we sold over 7,000 homes in that time frame. A lot of investors, a lot of ups and downs in that period as well. Learned a lot the hard way, went through the crash, almost burned out, was able to work through that in an impossible time to sell homes, and just learned a lot of things along the way. In the meantime, I went back to school. I got my master's degree. I also had a lot of side businesses always going. I just get bored easily. And so I was trying different things. I did some coaching. I coached high school baseball at one point. I, volunteered at a youth camp for a time, just doing different things and trying to figure out what I wanted to really do. And the real estate thing obviously was amazing. And then about 3.5 years ago, I sold the most expensive home ever in Utah. It was a $32 million house. Got a 7-figure commission, put in less than an hour of work. And I kind of just had this realization. About the same time, there was an agent, and we worked a lot the same way, called a lot of for sale by owners. So we kind of ran into each other a lot. And he had 7 kids, went to pick up his rent check at one of his rental properties at a 4-plex he owned in kind of a shady part of town. And he got shot to death. And in the paper, all the stories and everything, on the news, it was the #1 story for a few days, but all they talked about the whole time was like, realtor gets shot, realtor killed, realtor this. And I kind of had this realization as, I loved being a realtor, and I help people find their dream home and, where they're going to raise their family. There's a lot of value in that. But I also was like, damn, if I die tomorrow and the only thing I was known as a realtor, I'd be really sad. I'm so much more than that. And so it kind of started me on this path. Again, when I sold that big house too, I had this realization like, okay, I think I'm done with this. I need to find something that's going to be a little bit more impactful for the universe. And so that next year I wrote a book with my best friend, Cameron. It's called You End Up Where You're Heading: The Hidden Dangers of Living a Safe Life. And it's all about the hero's journey, about, not playing it safe in life. And I kind of started saying to myself, well, real estate is the safe path to me. I mean, I was at that time, just to give you context, I was making between 3 and 5 million a year in commissions. I mean, it was crushing. But I was kind of over it. And so I essentially started on this path to figure out what I was going to do next. And it led me to realizing, I had a lot of people reaching out to me about coaching them and wanting me to coach them on life or just business, real estate, all these different things. I knew I didn't want to be a one-on-one coach. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. But I'd seen a couple friends of mine, Sean Whalen, Ryan Stuman, some of these guys that had started these coaching groups, and I saw the impact they could have. And I started thinking maybe that's, something I could do. And as I started thinking about it, I realized, well, who am I to tell other people how to live their life? I kind of have that imposter syndrome we all get, because I never wanted to coach just to the sake of doing it. I mean, I was better off just selling real estate. And, but then I was doing a meditation with a friend of mine, and it helped me realize that the group, who needed what I could offer, was all these guys would reach out to me. They'd ask me the same 2 questions all the time on the internet, on Instagram and stuff. They'd say, #1 is, you guys have such a tight group of friends. Where do I find a group of friends like you have? And then the other question was, I kind of feel like I'm stuck in life. You look like you're really living. I mean, I was going to all the major sporting events, just hanging out with my friends and family all the time. I've been to over 100 countries. And so I've just been doing a lot of crazy stuff. And people's like, I feel like I'm stuck. How do I get out of this spot? And so that was what I realized, like, wow, I actually am really good at 2 things. I know how to, live an extraordinary life, like how to really put myself out there and do things. I'm not afraid to try anything. And then 2 is, I knew that I was as good as anyone in the world at helping men connect on a deep level. That's kind of the gift that I have. All my best friends have met through me. I mean, I truly have, I think, the best group of friends in the world. I have 7 or 8 very tight best friends, another 30 close guy friends. And I said, that's it. It's going to be a men's group. And I'm going to help men connect on a deep level, get depth to their relationships like they've never had. So I formed what is now the group, which I'm putting 98% of my time these days into, which is called We Are the They. And that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half. So now we're over 300 men that I coach, over 450 people in the program, if you include women, and then the next gen program, which you spoke to, which is the kids 13 to 17. And it's just been absolutely my favorite thing I've ever done. I've working harder than ever, but feel like I'm never working. And so that's really all my focus now is helping men. In society, every guy feels alone on some level. They just do, whether they're in a relationship or single or whatever else. And so my goal is to help people connect, be able to talk about things that they're, otherwise never would. Just as an example, this last weekend, we had one of our events. I had 60 guys doing a 3-day event. And the third night we had this share section where a lot of guys can share stuff. And one of the guys got up and we create this container to be safe so that people want to talk about stuff. And he starts mumbling, and he's kind of crying. He says, he's 38-year-old guy. Says these words have never come out of my mouth, but as a kid, I was sexually abused, and starts telling us, and he's on the road to recovery. And that night went home and told his wife for the first time. She found out, and here we go. I actually went on a walk with him this morning just to follow up with him and see how he's doing great. But my point is this, I've kind of led to this spot where we truly get to make this giant impact. And it's just kind of where I've just kind of always listened. I've kind of let my life be guided, and this is kind of where it led me. So that's what I'm doing now, and I freaking love it.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to come back to the We Are the They and how that gets started, but I want to go back into your first few years of childhood. The first question, okay? The first question you ask yourself, the first question I ask myself, seems like, or close to, is very similar. I'm the 7th of 11 kids, and I grew up, my parents were Pizza Hut drivers, dirt poor out in Grantsville, Utah. They bought a house a few months before I was born, but then we moved into it a few months after I was born. That was condemned because the people who bought it before us tried to build a second story on single story foundation. And so the city came in and condemned it. We bought it because it was cheap, trying to stay out of debt. And we reinforced the base, the foundation, section by section, and then they built the second story. But point is, it was hard, right? There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of fear. I mean, there was one point when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I don't even know if I was 5 or 6. Anyways, my mom took my brother, just older than me, myself, and then my sister, and then the next brother. And she took us to California, Nevada, and she told my dad, from my understanding, this is how I remember the story. It may not be like factual because it's so funny. Perception is our reality. But hey, I'm going to leave. And if I come back and our house isn't livable, then we're getting divorced and the kids are going up for adoption. Like that, it was like an ultimatum. And she took us and gave them 2 months to finish a livable space in the house. And on that trip, I got bit by a dog on the nose. So I don't love dogs much. And I've got a scar on my nose. But point is, it's very seared in my memory, this experience and what was going on emotionally during that time. And then add to that, growing up, the financial stress led a lot to fear, and then abuse in very different circumstances. Well, so I graduated, or I left home thinking, how can I help families avoid anxiety, depression, domestic violence, divorce, all these social issues? And I was led to, through the research, that financial literacy is a major player, financial confidence inside of the home, financial understanding is a major player in eliminating those things. And so that's when I shifted my whole focus to teaching people how money works. But for you hear your parents fighting, and I don't know what the question is, but the answer to the question is, if I have more money, then there'd be less fighting.
Yeah. So, I mean, how can I make sure that my house isn't one that's where there's fighting, right? Like that's the question that I answered.
Right. And how many people need to ask themselves that question? What is the stress in our house? What is the cause of the discord in our house, in our relationship? That's a powerful question. Like, rather than just trying to band-aid it, take a second, journal about it, and find out what is the cause. And maybe you're not sure. Maybe you have a list of 10 things. You're like, they all kind of feel equally the same pressure. Okay, which one do we want to relieve the pressure on first? Let's knock it off the list. Let's see if that was the one. If we move that and things improve, great. Let's go to the next one. If we move that and things get worse because that wasn't the underlying issue, aren't you glad you found out that there was a better issue or a bigger issue underneath it, right? So that's a powerful question that you intuitively ask yourself that I think most people, for whatever reason, don't allow themselves to ask themselves. So huge there. So now I'm going to go to the next thing. That this is a question I ask myself. Really, this is one of my guiding questions that really helps me stay sane, that you mentioned was, well, what's your worst case scenario?
Yeah.
Once you figured out you could make money you can make 6 figures selling door to door, you're like, so this is my worst case scenario at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That's another question. How many people have asked themselves, what's my worst case scenario? And like really got comfortable with the darkness of what their worst case scenario is.
Yeah. Well, Lewis Howes just came out with his new book, The Greatness Mindset, and pretty good friend of mine. And I just love that book. It's a roadmap for how to work through these questions. The best I've ever seen, to be honest. Tony Robbins has a thing called Time of Your Life, which is where I used to direct people till this book came out. But in that, he says, if you write down your fears, if you actually write them down, and then you play them out. All right, write it out. What is the worst case scenario here? And just by putting it on paper, you kind of minimize the fear of them, because you start seeing like, oh, I can actually live with that, And one of the gifts of my life is when I was young, I tried a lot of things that didn't work. I bought a bunch of real estate in 2005, 2006, and ended up getting my ass handed to me. And I was fine. I worked through it. I started businesses that failed. I did a TV show that I ended up losing money on. I had, my meat business. My partner ended up stealing 120 grand. I got stuck with the debt and had to pay it off over 2 years. I mean, I made so many mistakes, but all of them, all the things you would be afraid of, right? All the things that you would fear. The beauty of it is as I went through those, nobody was like, man, Jimmy is quite the failure. It was the exact opposite, right? They're like, damn, this guy is just like willing to go for it. And even when things don't work out, and it was so admirable to my peers or to people that were watching me. And I really overcame this fear of failure. And in that same book, Lewis Howes talks about Sarah Blakely, who was the founder of Spanx, the first self-made billionaire woman under age 30, I believe, ever in the United States. And she talked about, like, when she was a kid, her parents would ask her one question, which, speaking of good questions, this was one of the best questions I ever heard. Every day she'd come home, her parents would say, what did you fail at today? And talk about a mind change right there. Like, talk about a mind-blowing question. What did you fail at today? Because when you start to realize that failing actually is not a bad thing, the failures that people regret are the ones they never do. It's the stuff they never took a chance on, the risks they never took, the conversation they never had, the girl they never talked to, the job they never quit, the friend they never made up with. Like, that's the stuff that people regret. Nobody regrets the decisions they make, because even think like, worst case scenario, someone's like, somebody gets pregnant in high school, right? Oh my gosh, my life is falling apart. Within months, days, hours, seconds of that kid being born, they do not regret the decision anymore. Like, they have their child, and like, they're so grateful, even though it wasn't ideal, it's not something they would have any different. And so, like, in life, if you can ask yourself that question, and anytime so we work with a ton of real estate investors, right? That's kind of the main, probably 5,000 of the homes that we've sold have been to investors. And the number one question we ask them is, all right, like, what's your risk tolerance? Like, and when people say, should I do the deal? I ask them 2 questions. I say, number one, what's the worst case scenario? And can you live with it? That's the questions that I ask them. What's the worst case scenario? Can you live with it? So if you buy a place and if it goes under, it doesn't work out, and you're completely destroys you financially, well, don't do the deal. But I had somebody ask me the other day about kind of a risky investment. It's kind of a tech thing that might work. It'd be a 10 to 50x if it works. I said, well, do you have money that you're willing to lose to put into that? Because if it's money that you don't care if you lose it, obviously you care, but not really. It's not going to change your life. You're not going to have to make sacrifices outside of that. I said, then go ahead and do it. But if you're going to be stressed about it, if you need it to perform, absolutely you should not make that investment, because you're going to be way too stressed about it, and it won't be worth it, the life change that it's going to make for you in a stress situation. So those are the questions I always ask people, is, can you live with the worst case scenario? And really, even what is that?
Right. And what's interesting is we all have our own spin on it. So like my 4 questions that I journaled about for 12 plus years, that now it's almost instantaneous in your mind, because once you journal about these questions, you get in the habit of viewing life through this lens. you don't have to ask yourself, oh man, how am I going to be grateful for this? Maybe for like really, really big things. You're like, oh, that one hurt. I got to really process some gratitude for that one. But once you start living in a position of gratitude, a lot of times you can train your mind to just respond that way. It's just the automatic default. And so my questions for this process of what's the worst case scenario, it's actually slightly different focus, but it's people who have already experienced trauma or already are experiencing life. What factually happened, remove all the emotion out of it. Just what factually happened. Like, let's talk about the facts. What factually happened? How do you feel about the facts? How did you feel about the facts? How do the facts make you feel? And there you get to write your whole gripe session, like 100% of it. And then what could also be true? That's where you start finding out like, well, what could also be around that area? What could also be true there? And then the next area is, why am I grateful? What did I learn from it? And if you start processing life through facts, emotions, what could also be true, and then why are you grateful? It's hard to be upset at the end of any experience because you've processed this thing. So the worst case scenario, it drives my wife a little batty sometimes. She's like, why are you always going through the worst case scenarios? I'm like, because once I figure out what the worst case scenario is and that I can live with it, that's my new ground zero. And I can project 6 months out. Okay, well, this is worst case scenario. Once you understand the worst case scenario, you're able to start putting in safeguards. You're actually able to start making contingency plans. But if you go in happy-go-lucky, Alice in Wonderland, thinking that there's never going to be a bad thing, then that's how you really get screwed, because you're not even aware of the worst case scenario.
Yeah, that was very well said.
So then the other question, these are questions that I'm just curious what your answers are. What question led you into real estate? Like, what you said that you basically finally decided that real estate was going to be the place after a lot of other stuff. What was the question that like made that something of enough passion that you're still doing it today? You've done it for multiple years and you became good at it, not just okay, but like you became the best at it.
Yeah. I mean, the question that led me into it, well, to be honest, I just kind of knew that I'd be good at it. And so maybe the question is like, it's one of the few careers you can make a lot of money with very little schooling, I think, or very little training. You get in, and immediately start making a lot of money. And so I think for me, well, this is a good one. All my friends, 3 of my best friends became doctors. One became a lawyer. One went the corporate route, worked for Google. Another one went into the military. And so they all were going to, best case scenario, kind of start making their money in their 30s. Minus the Google guy, I guess. And I was over here like, I don't want to be rich when I'm in my 30s. I want to have money at 23, 24. Like, I want to be wealthy now. So I think the question I had to ask myself was like, well, how can I achieve that? Right. And in real estate, it became very obvious, 90 hours of schooling. And then if I knew I'd be good at it, if I just worked hard. And so I think that was the question I asked myself, is like, what career could I go into that, selfishly, I'd make a lot of money. I wanted to have my own schedule. I wanted to do things my way. And so that was naturally, real estate was the perfect choice for me, with what my desires were.
Okay. So now follow up question to that, because you said you failed for 6 months. What led you into hiring a coach, period? Like, what was the question that led you to hiring a coach? Secondary to that is, what led you to hiring the best coach? Because you've seen it, I've seen it. People go out and hire a coach, and the coach is maybe worse than they are, right? They should be coaching the coach, but they hire somebody. And I commend you for hiring somebody, but like, you didn't just go hire anybody in the country or in your vicinity. You said, who's the best person that I can hire? So what led you to hiring a coach? And then what further question led you to hiring the best coach?
Well, there's a couple ways to answer this. So, I've always asked myself, who's the best in the world at this? I'll go learn from them. So just being honest.
But let's pause. That question, who's the best in the world at what I'm trying to accomplish? Most people don't ask themselves that question or do the research to find out the answer. Even if they do, they're like, well, I don't know. And then that's the extent of their, don't stop at, I don't know. Go find out who the best person at whatever you're trying to accomplish is and study them. And you don't have to pay them to coach them. Most of the best people in the world, just like Jimmy, they're giving their stuff away for free online to a degree because like they want you to win. The best people in the world aren't holding their secrets. They're trying to give it to you any way you'll take it. And sometimes it means they need to charge you for it.
Well, and I've done that so many times. Like when I wanted to learn how to, and it's, by the way, a better question is, who's the best in the world that I have access to? And nowadays in 2023, you have access to everybody if you got the right bank account, right? Like you really do. I'll just give you an example. I wanted this year. I mean, I'm kind of very well known in Utah. Everybody in Utah kind of knows who I am. I've done a really good job of, building my brand here as an influencer and just a speaker, author, coach, all those things. Outside of Utah, not so much anymore. And so I said, well, the number one person right now, in my opinion, for speaking, number one book last year is Ed Milet. And so I went and I hired Ed Milet to be my one-on-one coach. He is my coach right now. And then I said, all right, well, who's in the world, the best in the world at helping build funnels and, marketing side, doing these things the right way? And there's a guy named Mel Abraham. He's the dude that basically blew up Brendon Burchard. He's his right-hand guy. He's the guy that's his best friend. And Brendon Burchard is nailed internet marketing and all these things. So I hired him to teach me that. When I wanted to learn how to be a public speaker, I knew a guy here in Utah. He's the number one speaker in Utah. He's in the National Speakers Hall of Fame. Guy's given over 6,000 speeches. His name's Dan Clark. And I hired him. He became my mentor, right? And so I've done this in all these different aspects. In real estate, if I'm being honest, the first time I did it, I'd like to tell you I was a genius at 24. I got lucky. I found a flyer and went to a seminar, and it happened. I found it out later after I learned the industry that he is the GOAT, like he's the best. Mike Ferry. At the time, I did not know that. I kind of stumbled upon it and got lucky. But as you know, the universe had my back and put that opportunity in front of me. So the first time I hired the best, it was kind of an accident. But since then, I've been very deliberate in going out and figuring out who that is in whatever I'm trying to learn. Okay.
So I love that question. Who's the best at this in the world that I have access to? So then you mentioned that you went back and got your master's degree. Why? Like, what question did you ask yourself? Like, oh, maybe I need a master's degree. Why did you do that?
Yeah, like to be honest, it kind of had nothing to do with real estate or business. I had been dating. I was a little bit frustrated with dating in Utah. I felt like I dated every pretty girl in town, or at least tried. And so I was kind of ran through, the options here in Utah. I was trying to mix it up. I literally said, where could I go that I could still build my real estate business, that I can find women that I think will fit what I'm looking for and give me a new experience. And Arizona was kind of the obvious choice. And so I had to figure out a reason to go to Arizona. And I found out that Arizona State had a master's degree in real estate development. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a 9-month program from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day, 5 days a week. You're taking 8 classes at a time. I was like, this is literally the perfect program. I can boost my real estate career, my credibility in the real estate world while living somewhere else. It's not so long. I didn't have to, sell my house. I just rented it out and had a place back here in Utah still. I had buddies renting rooms and stuff. And so I went and I did that for a year, went and got my master's in real estate development. But the truth was, it was more about my dating life of where I wanted to go. And then I found a reason to go do it.
Sure. And this is why I'm so excited about this conversation, because the questions, like we see people with all these different accolades and we think, oh, they must have been. No, they're asking them like, how can I just find a meaningful relationship? I'm like trying to find a meaningful relationship. Where can I do that without ruining or not just without ruining, but like while still advancing the other things that are important to me?
Exactly right.
Okay. Like, I didn't know that was the reason. I had no idea. I was like, why did you already are a successful business owner. You're already a successful real estate agent.
And so everybody kept saying like, what are you doing? Why are you going to do that? But it actually really did. Like, I stood out over other realtors after that, like crazy. Like, this dude is a professional. He has a master's in real estate. Like, this isn't a hobby for him. He's the expert. We can trust him. So it really did, make a crazy impact on my career as well.
Well, and I think that's another aspect. So like the follow-up question that maybe we passed over in highlighting the initial question, which I love, but the follow-up question was not just, okay, this is what my goal is. I want a meaningful relationship. The follow-up question is, where can I do that while still advancing these other areas? This is not a zero-sum game where we have to give up one thing to do the other. We have to find the right method to accomplish everybody's happiness, to accomplish everybody's goals. Or when I say everybody, sometimes inside of yourself, you have multiple areas of your life, at least faith, family, fitness, finance, and fun, that you're trying to advance. And one doesn't have to take the hit to progress the other. It's about how do we find the right combination for you? And that's different for everybody. I mean, you're coaching in your group. And one of the posts you just made was that one of your mentees, I guess, I don't know,
sure,
friends, I just call them friends really at this point, but one of your friends, finally reached a spiritual goal that was for him life-changing. He's been working towards for a long time, that for Jimmy isn't necessarily a goal for Jimmy right now. But he was so happy to help him reach that goal in that religion because it was meaningful for him.
Yeah, it's not about me. It's like, whatever person, whatever their goals are, the goal is, my whole point is to try to help them get there, And
I think that's the great sign of a coach. And then when you're, I'm going to run out of time and I don't want to. So I want you to share kind of the genesis, what led to the genesis of the We Are the They movement, because that's another that pulls in. Before we were talking about how the relationship, he was looking for a relationship, a meaningful relationship. So he did something that advanced his career. This next part is still looking for a meaningful relationship, but it led to him terminating a relationship because the value system of one thing was not in alignment with the relationship. And this experience exposed that. And so then it's not always happy go lucky where everything works out, right? Although I think it's about finding the right combination. Sometimes finding the right combination means you're trying something and it fails or it doesn't work. And that's okay. And we got to learn to be okay with that. So please share that story with us of the genesis of the We Are the They movement.
Yeah, I mean, when I sold that house again, it was pretty like I had a message from God. It was like, you're done with this. Like, go do something more meaningful. It was that clear. In fact, we were doing like a meditation. The lady that was facilitating it was like, maybe sit on that for a few months. That's a pretty big deal. I guess they knew, like, I was literally the number one agent in the state that year. And so I started a process of figuring out what that was. Like, people think I just stumbled upon We Are the They. My original idea for We Are the They, I didn't know what it was going to be called. Like, I had 3 ideas. I basically had this brand, which was going to be We Are the They. And the only reason that I knew I needed to do something with that, because every time I got the tattoo on my arm, and every time I told somebody what it was, they literally said, that's the coolest story I've ever heard. You have to brand that. And I'll tell it real quick because it matters. But then the other 2 things is the coaching aspect was coming into it. And then I wanted to do these adventure trips because I have some buddies, Lewis Howes and Aubrey Marcus and Mitch Matthews. And some of these guys went on this trip, Steve Weatherford, and they went with Wim Hof in Poland. And they did this really cool trip where they went and, climbed a mountain for hours and hours with no shirt on and just crazy stuff like that. And I thought to myself, like, damn, I know how to throw the best vacations. My original idea for what I was going to do getting out of real estate was to get all of these influencers, tell their backstories, have a Netflix crew basically follow us, and then we'd go do crazy adventures as we told our stories. And that was the original idea. And so to give you an idea, this thing morphed and switched so many times to become what it is today. But anyway, but with We Are the They, I just wanted to do something with that brand. I wanted to trademark it. It's my thing. And what had happened is I had started about 6-7 years ago. I got a chance to go undercover with a group, a couple of different groups, and we would go help rescue kids that were being sex trafficked. And we would go down as the Americans looking to get kids and things like that. And we were undercover, obviously. And I remember the third op I ever went on, I came back from, it was a really dangerous one. It was probably my favorite one. We took down some bad dudes, rescued some kids, just a crazy experience. And I'm telling my girlfriend about it in the truck on our way home. And she pulls over and she says, hey, I got to be honest, like, I don't really want you to do this anymore. It's super dangerous and it's just not a very good environment. And I was like, I know, did you not just hear what I said though? We just rescued these kids. Like, this is going to be a big part of the rest of my life. And she says, well, I know, but why can't they just go do it? And without thinking or without hesitation, I said, what do you mean there is no they? Like, we are the they. And when I said that, I was like, oh shit, that's a motto for life right there. And so that's from that day forward, that became my life motto, right? That's why I got it tattooed on my forearm. And, we don't wait for other people to do something. We do it. So I wanted to do something with that. I wanted to do coaching and I wanted to do these adventure trips. And it was a process of like 2 years in the making of getting a year and a half before I finally figured out it was going to be a men's group. And instead of just adventures, that would be a part of it. So we go do crazy adventures. That's part of my coaching program. I'm taking 70 guys to run with the bulls in July in a couple months. We just got back from Iceland, 40 of us. We went and swam with tiger sharks last year in the Bahamas with no cage. I mean, we do crazy stuff for sure. It's a big part of our program, but it's really just an ancillary part. And the whole point of that is when you do things that make you very uncomfortable, it helps you push past your fears. Then all of a sudden, it's not hard to have a conversation with your wife about something that you need to, or to be able to talk to your kid that, something's uncomfortable, or to be able to talk to your boss and, get the raise that you deserve or want or whatever. And so the whole point of that is by pushing yourself to be uncomfortable. It's kind of the whole idea of the ice bath right now, right? It's like make yourself deliberately uncomfortable. And then there's so much growth in that. So that's a big part of my program. But this all came together from like years of studying and planning and coaching and talking to people until I came up with what I believe is the perfect program for men to get vulnerable, authentic, and in integrity, and to build a strong support system to help them in life.
Yeah. Before we move on to, I'm going to shift the context of the conversation a little bit one more time. But talk about the next gen, we are the they, as well in conjunction with this. Because again, I think all this stuff is stuff that like my heart has been wanting to do. I'm not as action taking as Jimmy has apparently, or resources or whatever.
Let's ask a good question. Why not?
Why not? Honestly, for me, the answer that I have every time is I haven't found I've asked people, I'll ask you too, like, who do you know that has the family life and the marriage relationship? They haven't transferred, they've never been divorced. And I say transferred as in the contract, one spouse outgrew the other spouse, and that became more important than marriage, and the children while they're young. So for me, my highest right now in my life, my highest value is being able to see my children grow. I missed my first two kids. I missed their first word and their first steps. And with my daughter, I was like, I'm not doing that. I don't care. Like, I would rather be poor and get to be there for those experiences than make money or do it. Like, it's not more important to me. And so if I could find a coach that has all of those things and didn't sacrifice their family, then I'd be more interested in that. Ed Milet is probably the closest thing that I know of to that. I don't know him and his family personally, and how, not necessarily how his kids turned out, but like how much was he really there in the beginning of his children's life? It's easy from a position 20 years later to say, oh, it was all worth it. Maybe. But I want to have those memories. So that's why I haven't done it. So to answer your question, but
I only ask that because it's good to do the exercise, right? Like,
but I'm definitely open to your feedback right now. Like if you know something.
I think that God gives us messages, or our soul's calling us, and it's like maybe the timing of it or whatever, or maybe you need to be the example of somebody that shows how to do that. I mean, I do believe that I'm uniquely qualified or placed to do this coaching that I do, because I mean, I put in 80 hours a week. It is a lot, but I am single. So I am allowed, I have the time space to do it. But maybe you are the guy that shows that you can do it as a married guy, 100% putting family first,
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not opposed to, like, if somebody can. What I found is every time I found somebody that I think, oh yeah, that they're a good person, then I get close to them and I see behind the curtain of their relationship. I'm like, nah, I would never want to treat my wife that way. I'd never want to treat my kids that so then it's like, there's a lot of stuff that's facade that when you get behind the curtain, you actually get to know somebody. It's like, no, that's not what I'm building for. So
yeah, I mean, I know what you're talking about. There's plenty of that, but I believe that's a limiting belief, because I know so many guys that, have an amazing relationship with their wife and are kicking butt in business and life and all that too.
No, sure. I'm not trying to discredit the people that.
I'm just challenging you. That's what I do.
No, I know. I appreciate it, Jimmy. That's why I have you on this podcast, because it's about questions. So, that's what I'm saying. Like, who are those people? You know them. Who are those people?
Well, here's one of the best. So we're talking about questions. Tony Robbins has this thing that he does. He says, it's one of the best questions you can ask yourself. So anytime you have a limiting belief, like that's a very limiting belief, regardless of however else you think about it.
Sure.
Ask yourself this one question. What if that wasn't true? It's a beautiful question. All right. What if that wasn't true? What if you can be the greatest husband and dad and be this coach that's doing the things that you're talking about, your soul calling you to do? And so just asking that question, when people say like, oh, that's impossible because of this or whatever, I can't do that because of this, just ask that one question and you have to come up with an answer. Well, what if that wasn't true? It's such a perfect question.
Right. And I believe that it's not true. I just haven't found the person to coach me on how to do it.
Well,
so
you need somebody to coach you on how to do it, or do you just go for it? I didn't have anybody to show me how to do this. Like, there's not a footprint for what I'm doing, right? Like, no one's ever done it.
You're right. And so those are things that I need to work on, Jimmy. Those are things I need to work on.
That's the question
right now. No, I appreciate it. I really do. I appreciate it. But talk about the next gen movement that you're creating for the next generation of youth.
Yeah, well, it's kind of ironic from what we just talked about. Because so what happened is I had my first ever coaching call with Ed Milet back in December. And he asked me on it. He said, do you have any interest in coaching or helping the youth? He said, if I'm being real, Jimmy, nobody's focusing on that age group. Nobody's doing it. It's not out there. There's no good programs for them. And it's because it's harder to sell. You got to get the parents to pay it. The kids are, are a little bit different to work with. He said, if I was you, and I strongly recommend this, he said, you can make the most impact by working with that age group. So don't rule it out. Try to figure out a way to work with that age group. And so I started thinking on it. And I had coached high school baseball for 3 years, about a decade ago. And it was actually my favorite thing I ever did. I love that age. They're so impressionable. They so badly want to do the right things. They want to find those mentors. They want to be shown how they can have an amazing life. And there's not a lot out there. They're getting educated on TikTok and from, stupid celebrities that give them bad information. And so took Ed's advice and just decided to, it's funny because that part of my program, I'll be lucky if it's even profitable, but it's kind of my give back project. But I wanted to set up a system that we're going to teach them for 1 year. It's everything I wish I was taught when I was their age. It's all the lessons I've learned. It's all these things I've picked up along the way from the amazing people I have in my life. And we're going to teach it to these kids. I got 50 kids that we're getting in the first program. Our first get together is the beginning of June. And it's funny because, I'm going to be getting guys like Andy Frisella and Ed Milet and Dan Fleischman and over like Steve Weather. These are the kind of people that are going to be teaching these guys. They're so happy to help me. They're so willing to come on and they volunteer their time because they appreciate what we're doing. So these kids are going to be getting a Harvard education from the smartest human beings alive that have done this stuff. Some of the most badass speakers on the planet. They won't even appreciate it till 5 years later, I bet. But at the end of the day, we're going to absolutely teach them everything. It's basically the program is completely designed. Jimmy, what would have you wanted to know at 14 years old? Let's teach them that. And we can teach it from a level of experience and understanding and knowledge that, will forever change their lives, every one of these kids.
Yeah, I love it. So those two things combined, and it started out as a men's group from my understanding. Are you now moving it into like more co-ed, or is it you're going to have a women's group and a men's group? Like, how's that going to work?
No, the focus is still the men's group. I am a men's coach. That's my men's group. That's 100% what my focus is on growing. I brought in some partners that are amazing. So what I realized is these men are growing so much, their wives and girlfriends need to come along with them. So we set up a Queen's Edition. So we have over 125 women in the Queen's Edition. I brought in my life coach, Melissa. She was 22 years, been a coach with Tony Robbins and other organizations. She's a wizard, brilliant. And so she runs the women's group, which runs parallel to the men's group, but it's completely separate. And then we have the kids group. I brought in this guy, Mo Brissett, who's just, again, just a brilliant human, and he's running the next gen program. And so my focus is all the men's group, but I kind of help out, guide and direct and ancillarily in working through the other groups as well.
Okay. So, and with the women's group and with the kids group, are they also going to, just because I'm curious, are they also going to go through a lot? I know the men's group goes through these crazy experiences like swimming with tiger sharks and like bungee jumping. I saw is terrifying. Sounds terrifying.
Yeah. Like the women are going to go swim with some gray whales in Mexico. Like it's a little bit softer, they go do breath work or go on a yacht party, stuff like that, like more feminine type things. There is a little bit of the adventure stuff, and then, but more geared towards the feminine. And with the young kids, we have them jumping off the rope swing, same as we did with the men. We're going to have them, getting trained by these military guys where they get their butts kicked a little bit and doing some of these things. A lot of just stuff that boys need to be out in the, in the world doing. Yeah. But it's not as like high level as, because of the price. Obviously we can't take them and, run with the bulls in Spain, but we can take them and, put them through some pretty amazing exercises here locally.
So, and is that just for young men or is it for young men and young women?
Just young men right now. Yeah. We'll eventually have something for now. The young women, we set up like mother-daughter events that we want the young women to come be a part of with the Queen's Edition. But just because of my bandwidth, we don't have anything for the young women yet. So.
No, that's cool. I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing that. Before we ask some of these final questions, where would somebody, if they wanted to work with you or join your We Are the They movement or the Queen's Edition or the Next Gen, where would they approach you? Is Instagram the best place? Or where do they reach out to you?
I mean, I think the best place for me is Instagram. I put everything on my Instagram. It's mrjimmyrex. If you follow me, you'll see my stories. You'll see me posting these things. Like we just opened up the men's group yesterday. 2 days ago, Wednesday. And so, but yeah, so we've, that link's in my bio, but also, wattmovement.com, WATT movement.com is our official website where everything runs through as well. And, yeah, man, all the programs are on there, everything that we're doing. I invite you to check it out. There's really nothing else like this out there. I was in self-development for 20 years and I went to every conference, every mastermind, every coaching program, every book you can get on this stuff. I devoured all of it. And I just took all the best stuff over those 20 years and I put it all into my program. And that's, I think, what makes it special is, it's like I've been in the trenches. I've done these things. I've had the experience. I've had the mentorship, but that's what my program is. And I took all the things I hated about other masterminds and I left it out, and all the things I loved and we put it into this one.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love it. So the next thing that I just want you to highlight on before we finalize is, I would say this from the people that I know that have been through your course, and what you say your gift is and what they say your gift is, it's the same, which is awesome. But like the ability for men to connect on a deep level, why is that? Like, what about our society do you feel is missing that's creating that? Obviously you created it for a reason, but like, why? Why was that so important other than people were reaching out and asking for it?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to change the world, you start with each person individually, like one at a time. Change yourself and then help other people that's the greatest gift you can give somebody, is to help them feel safe and feel seen and, feel understood. And so it's never been okay for men to not be okay. I know from my own personal experience for, my entire 20s, I felt like I was broken, and I wasn't. I was a saint. But and so because I went through that experience, I know what these men feel like and I know what they need. And I think all we can do is create. I mean, I actually have this training I've done recently called the 5 Pillars of Success. And it really covers these 5 things exactly, that to make a lasting change, what you need. And number 1 is you've got to, get some moral ground. You have to get into integrity. And then you have to change your behaviors. You got to change your habits. You've got to have the skills, the knowledge, and the support to do that, and it goes through the 5 pillars. I won't go into them all here, but you guys can go to my stuff and you can see my training on that. But ultimately, I figured out this system that really creates lasting change so that you, wherever you're at, you can get to where you're trying to go. But I think it's just, it's probably the most needed thing out there. Men are alone. I mean, it's never been more difficult to be a male in society than it is in 2023. Like, they're under attack from every angle. And ultimately, this is a program designed to just help men support each other, build the community, have a place where they can, be open and vulnerable and be loved in that state as opposed to being judged.
And this may be a strange question, so I don't really know how to ask it either, because it's probably varying, but because you've had the experience in doing it, you talk a lot about people who get comfortable enough to be vulnerable, which I think is super powerful. How do you help, on an average, from somebody entering your group, generally, how long do you feel like it takes for them to open up and really say, okay, I actually am in a safe place? Because the reason where this question comes from, I studied neuropsychology when I went to college. I didn't study finance. I went in neuropsychology. And from that perspective, your brain's job is to protect you from pain, hardship, sorrow, keep you alive. And so when you have these traumatic experiences, oftentimes you don't even remember, your brain doesn't allow you to remember the trauma that you've been through. It seals it off and says, nope, that's not for you to remember. So you have all these things that are going on in your life and you don't even know why. You really have no idea. You're not intentionally omitting truth. You just don't know.
Right.
As your brain starts to recognize that you're not under threat and you're in a safe enough environment, it starts to allow you to have access to these memories. It's like, this is how your brain works. Right. So you're seeing this on a multi-year scale. You've been taking men through this. What's like an average, I say, processing time for men to feel like they're not going to be under threat to share their deep, dark secrets that they feel are deep, dark, but really,
yeah. Well, and again, I think what makes my program special is our ability to set a safe container. The first weekend we get together, I do an exercise with the guys that immediately half the group is sharing things they've never shared before. I mean, guys sharing their wife cheated on them. They cheated on their wife or girlfriend. They've had a pornography issue, whatever it is, right? Like there's so many things. They were molested as a kid. And I'd say about half the group immediately within one day, they're there, just because the way I don't really give away what exactly I do. That's part of being a part of the program, but we're very good at setting that container. And then throughout the next time we get together 3 months later, you get 5 more guys out of the 50 of that group will come out and talk about stuff. This last one, for example, the example I gave earlier, it's been a year for this guy. And, and he told me, I told you I went on a walk with him this morning, and he said, I didn't think I'd ever share that. I didn't think I needed to. And he goes, it wasn't until, it's funny you say like our brain, he goes, it wasn't until I got up to share that I actually started feeling it again and remembering all the things and exactly. And it just kind of came out. And, but so sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes longer. I mean, I do think that, when you create that safe space though, and the guys, honestly, more than anything, they have to know you care. And my guys do. And, the other guys care about them. We had another experience this weekend where, one of the guys has a sciatic nerve in his leg or back or wherever the hell it is. But he was in a lot of pain for one of the trainings we were doing, but he didn't want to quit. And he was in so much pain, he ended up passing out. And by the time I saw him, he was just cuddled in the arms of one of our other members. He's one of the leaders in our group. And this guy's like 6'4", 280. So he's a big dude, and he's just cuddling into him, and he's crying, and like, they're just holding him. And it was like the most beautiful scene of men just like supporting each other. And, it was one of those perfect moments in life. And he got up later and just talked about how his different breakthroughs. And he's like, I didn't break. Like my body literally quit on me. He literally passed out. And, but to have the support of the guys in the group and kind of what that meant. And so, we've created this community, this safe place for guys to be able to break and not have to be shamed by it or anything else. It's actually a beautiful moment, and breakthrough after breakthrough comes from that.
Okay. So thank you. This is the last question, promise, because then we got to go. But with that and everything he said, just go to his program. Vulnerability is innumerably valuable. Like there's no way to put a value on having vulnerability and having connection through that. With the process of but creating that safe space so that people are choosing into vulnerability. What is that's going to be a bad way to ask the question. In your experience of helping these men through this, how would you say that they change? I know it's a broad question, but the changes that happen when we realize that we can be safe and share information.
Well, yeah, I mean, so, the biggest problem when you're not vulnerable, like you hang on to these things, you have shame or guilt or whatever over, right? Like, let's say whatever it is. And because of that, anytime you're receiving love, you kind of, in the back of your mind, whether subconsciously or consciously, you're thinking, gosh, like if they really knew who I was, they wouldn't love me. So it's really hard to accept the love you're getting. And so even though people are pouring into your bucket, it's like it's got holes in it. And so when you break those barriers down, you actually show yourself like, this is me. And then you feel loved in that state, whether from the other men, whether from your wife or your family or whoever it might be. All of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, I'm just enough. Like I'm lovable, even in spite of me not being perfect. Like they just love me. And then that self-love starts to happen because you realize you're lovable and you're enough. And I mean, that changes everything. And so that's, I think, the biggest reason why vulnerability matters. That's the reason why the program works, because all of a sudden you can accept all the love that you're getting.
Thank you so much. I have a quote that I wrote down in 2018. I was going through my phone the other day with my wife, and it said, you only feel like you're not enough because you haven't shown others enough of who you are.
Very well said.
I was like, dang, how did I forget that? It's in my notes. So great. But thank you so much, Jimmy, for helping people feel comfortable enough to show enough of who they are. And one of the things that I've gained from learning how to be vulnerable myself is inside your head, not only does it feel like you won't be loved, but you think you're the only one who has the problem. When you're in a group of 50 guys and they say, who's done this? And half of the crowd has the same thing you do. It's freeing because you're like, oh man, I know somebody else now who can commiserate, not necessarily commiserate, but like we can support each other through growth. Yeah. And that's freeing. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your life and making that a purpose to help our society grow in that way. And I'm excited for it to get a much bigger, and have a much bigger impact and influence on the world in all areas, men, women, children, helping us all become stronger and healthier mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, check us out. It's we're growing like crazy, and we're just going to keep going, man. It's too important. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and we'll have a wonderful day. Catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.